Before we dive into this incredible true story that will completely change how you see the African savanna, I need you to do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what you're about to witness is one of the most jaw-dropping acts of courage ever captured in the wild. This story will move you in ways you never expected. The Serengeti stretched endlessly in every direction, a golden ocean of grass that seemed to go on forever under the African sun. It was home to millions of animals, all fighting to survive in a place where every single day meant facing death. But there was one lioness in this vast wilderness that would soon become a legend, not because of how strong she was, but because of what she was willing to do for the ones she loved. Her name was Amara, and she wasn't the biggest lioness in her pride. She wasn't the fastest hunter. She wasn't even considered the bravest by the other lions who knew her. What she was, though, was a mother, and in the African wild, that meant something powerful. It meant she would do absolutely anything to keep her family alive, even if it meant facing something that should have killed her 10 times over. Amara had 3 cubs, born just 6 weeks earlier in the safety of a den hidden among the acacia trees. 2 males and 1 female. They were the joy of her life, wobbling around on unsteady legs, learning to play, still entirely dependent on their mother for everything. The pride's territory was good. There was water, plenty of prey, and enough space for everyone to thrive. But like all good things in nature, peace never lasted forever. The dry season arrived without warning. One day the grass was green and the water holes were full. The next day, everything began to change. The sun grew hotter and more brutal. Water sources dried up faster than anyone expected. The prey animals that usually stayed in the territory began to move, following the rains to greener pastures, and as the food disappeared, desperation took over. Predators that normally avoided each other began to compete fiercely for every scrap of meat they could find. Amara noticed the change immediately. Her hunting trips became longer and more dangerous. She had to venture farther from her den to find anything worth eating. Every time she left her cubs behind, a fear crept into her chest. A fear that something might happen while she was gone. In the wild, a mother's worst nightmare isn't dying herself. It's the thought of her babies being left alone, vulnerable to every threat that roams the darkness. One afternoon, Amara made a kill. A young zebra, weak from lack of water and struggling to keep up with the herd. It wasn't huge, but it was real food, real meat. For the first time in days, she had something substantial to bring back to her cubs. She was so focused on dragging the zebra back toward her den that she didn't notice the shadows gathering around her. She didn't see the shapes moving through the tall grass. By the time she realized what was happening, it was already too late. They came at her from all directions, 10 hyenas, not the massive, solitary males that sometimes hunted alone. These were from a clan, organized and hungry, and absolutely vicious. Their laughter filled the air, that bone-chilling sound that echoes across the African plains. They had caught her scent on the wind and followed it straight to the zebra kill. Now they wanted the meat, and they didn't care if a lioness was standing over it. Amara's first instinct was to flee. That's what most animals do when they're outnumbered this badly. You run, you get away, you live to fight another day. But something stopped her. The realization that her den was just on the other side of that rocky outcrop. Her 3 cubs were there, sleeping in the afternoon heat, completely defenseless. If these hyenas got past her, if they found her babies, it would be over in minutes. So instead of running, she did something that would either save her family or destroy it. She stood her ground. She planted her body over the zebra carcass, spread her legs wide, and roared a challenge that shook the ground beneath her feet. The hyenas stopped their approach for just a second, surprised by her boldness. Most prey animals tried to run. Most predators tried to escape. But this lioness was choosing to fight them, all 10 of them. The biggest hyena, the one leading the pack, let out a cackle that sounded almost like laughter. It was a sound of pure mockery. He charged forward, and his entire pack followed like a wave of teeth and fur coming straight at her. Amara had maybe 5 seconds to make her move, 5 seconds to decide exactly how she was going to defend herself against impossible odds. When the lead hyena got close enough, she struck, not away from her cubs, but toward them. She drove forward with her front paws extended, her claws raking across the hyena's face with precision learned through a lifetime of survival. Blood sprayed across the dirt. The hyena screamed, a sound of genuine pain and shock, and stumbled backward. But before he could recover, 3 more of his packmates charged at her from different angles. What happened over the next 45 minutes was one of the most brutal fights anyone had ever witnessed in that part of the Serengeti. Amara was alone, surrounded on all sides, facing enemies that never got tired because as soon as one hyena would back away wounded, another would take its place. She fought with everything she had. Her teeth found purchase in necks and shoulders. Her claws opened deep wounds across faces and flanks. She spun constantly, never letting any of them get behind her, never turning her back on the pack even for a second. The hyenas were vicious and coordinated, but they weren't expecting to face someone this willing to die. They expected her to break. They expected her to run. But Amara understood something deep in her bones. Her cubs were behind her. Her responsibility was behind her. Every time she felt her energy fading, every time a hyena's teeth found her flesh and tore through fur and muscle, she thought about those 3 babies sleeping in the den. That thought pulled her back from the edge. By the halfway point of the fight, Amara was covered in blood. Not just the blood of the hyenas she'd wounded, but her own blood. A gash ran down her left side where one of the hyenas had managed to get in close. Her right ear was torn badly, hanging at an odd angle. One of her back legs was limping, possibly broken or seriously sprained. But she was still fighting. She was still blocking the path to her cubs. The hyenas began to understand that this wasn't going to be an easy victory. That was when something shifted. The pack started to fracture. Individual hyenas began to think about their own survival instead of pack victory. One of them had lost so much blood that it could barely stand. Another was refusing to engage, circling at the edges, unsure if the reward was worth the risk. The confident superiority that had marked the beginning of the attack was fading. Amara felt it too. She sensed the moment when the dynamic changed. Instead of becoming defensive, she became aggressive. She started pursuing them instead of just blocking them. She chased down one hyena that tried to slink away and drove him back with a ferocity that bordered on terrifying. She roared in a way that carried a message. I am not something you can defeat. I am stronger than all of you combined. One by one, the hyenas began to retreat. The ones that weren't too injured to move limped away into the grass. Their pride shattered, their confidence completely broken. The ones that were too badly hurt to make it anywhere were left behind, a testimony to what happens when you underestimate a mother's will to protect her young. By the time the last hyena disappeared into the golden grass, only Amara remained standing over her zebra carcass. She was breathing hard, her sides heaving, her body on the very edge of collapse. She had open wounds that would need to heal. She was exhausted in a way that went beyond just physical tiredness. But she was alive, and more importantly, she was still standing between the danger and her cubs. She looked down at the zebra, at the meat that had started all this, and realized it was now her saving grace. She had food, real, substantial food, enough to feed her cubs for days, enough to keep them strong while she healed from her injuries. When Amara finally dragged herself to her den, moving slowly because every step caused pain, her 3 cubs came running out to greet her. They didn't understand what their mother had just gone through. They only knew that she was back, that she was still alive, that they could eat. She lay down on her side, her body screaming with pain from her injuries, and allowed them to nurse. This moment right here, this simple act of feeding her babies after nearly dying to protect them, was everything. The other lionesses in her pride found her the next morning. They discovered Amara with infected wounds, a badly swollen face, and a limp that suggested serious injury. But they also found her cubs, healthy and alive and stronger than they'd been before. Word of what she'd done began to spread through the pride and beyond. A mother had faced 10 hyenas alone and won, not because she was stronger or faster or more skilled, but because she had something the hyenas didn't have. She had everything to lose. Over the next few weeks, Amara's reputation changed. The other lionesses began to look at her differently, with a respect that bordered on awe. The pride's dominant male, a massive lion named Rafiki, started to pay more attention to her. He would position himself near her den, as if standing guard. He brought her meat from his kills, something he rarely did for any female in the pride. He understood, in the way animals understand these things, that this was a special lioness. This was someone worth protecting. Her wounds healed slowly, but they healed. The gash on her side left a scar that ran in a white line through her fur, her ear torn and bent, never quite straightened out. One of her back legs remained slightly stiffer than the other, giving her a barely noticeable limp when she ran. But these scars became badges of honor. Every lion who saw her knew exactly what they meant. They knew she was someone who would do anything for her family. As her cubs grew, they began to show the influence of having a mother who had sacrificed so much for them. The two males grew fierce and confident, unafraid of challenges, but they also grew protective of others, showing an unusual compassion for cubs in the pride that didn't belong to them. The female grew to be one of the most intelligent hunters in her generation, always thinking 3 steps ahead, always planning strategy. All of them carried something from their mother's bravery in their own spirits. The story of Amara and the 10 hyenas became one of those legends that gets passed down in the African wild in ways we humans can barely understand. Other prides that roamed the Serengeti heard about her. Young male lions learned about her when they were cubs, told her story by the adults around them. She became proof that sometimes the greatest strength doesn't come from being the biggest or the fastest or the strongest. Sometimes it comes from loving something more than you love your own life. Scientists who studied the pride documented everything. They recorded the scars, the injuries, the timing of events. But what they found most remarkable was the lasting impact that one mother's decision had on her family and her pride. The cubs she'd fought for went on to have cubs of their own. Those cubs carried her genetic legacy, but they also carried something more important. They carried the knowledge of what bravery really looked like. They carried the memory of a mother who faced death itself and refused to back down. If you're feeling moved by this incredible story of sacrifice and love in one of Earth's most beautiful places, please smash that like button right now. It helps us bring you more of these amazing true stories from the African wild. Subscribe to our channel because we have dozens more stories about the incredible creatures that live in places most of us will never get to see. These are real stories about real animals, about survival and family, and the kinds of bonds that can't be broken. In the years that followed, Amara continued to hunt, to raise her cubs, to be part of her pride. She didn't become famous in the human sense. She didn't get her own documentary or her own social media accounts. But in the Serengeti, among the animals that lived there, she became immortal. She was the mother who fought 10 hyenas. She was the lioness who refused to fall. She was the proof that love is more powerful than any threat, that family is worth dying for, and that sometimes the most ordinary animals do the most extraordinary things. Every evening when the sun set over the golden grasslands and painted the sky in shades of orange and red, Amara would rest with her pride. Her scars would catch the last light, shining white against her darker fur, and any animal that saw those scars would know her story. They would know that she had faced death and won. They would know that she was someone whose love ran so deep that she could move mountains. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about one lioness and one night of fighting. It's about what it means to be a mother. It's about the choices we make when our babies are on the line. It's about discovering that we're capable of so much more than we ever thought possible when the people we love need us most. The rains came late that year, but when they finally arrived, they transformed the Serengeti into something magical. The dry, cracked earth drank deeply, and within days, the grass began to grow again. Green spread across the plains like a healing wound slowly closing. The waterholes filled up, and with them came the prey animals, returning to their traditional territories. Life was returning to normal, but nothing would ever be quite the same for Amara and her pride. By the time her cubs reached 4 months old, they were already showing signs of the hunters they would become. The two males would spend hours stalking each other through the tall grass, practicing the moves they'd watched their mother use. The female was more methodical, watching the adult lions hunt, studying their techniques, learning patience. But what stood out most was how protective they all were of each other, and how protective other members of the pride had become of them. Rafiki, the pride's dominant male, had taken a special interest in Amara's cubs. This was unusual. Male lions typically ignore cubs until they're old enough to become threats to their territory. But Rafiki was different. Perhaps he recognized something in these cubs, some echo of their mother's strength. Perhaps he understood that a lioness who could face 10 hyenas alone deserved his respect and protection. Whatever the reason, he had become a silent guardian, always nearby, always watchful. One afternoon, when Amara was away on a hunting trip with some of the other lionesses, a young male from another pride attempted to cross into their territory. He was hungry and desperate, looking for any opportunity to find food or establish himself somewhere new. He was young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, not fully grown but strong enough to be dangerous. He spotted Amara's cubs playing near the waterhole and saw an opportunity. Alone cubs meant an easy meal or possibly an easy way to prove himself to his competitors. What the young male didn't account for was Rafiki. The dominant lion emerged from the shade with a speed that was shocking for such a massive animal. His roar was enough to send every bird in the area flying skyward. The young male barely had time to process what was happening before Rafiki was on him, driving him away from the cubs with a display of power that left no room for argument. The message was clear. These cubs belonged to this pride. They were protected, and anyone who tried to harm them would answer to the king. Amara returned to find her cubs safe, playing exactly where she'd left them, and Rafiki resting nearby, his presence a silent promise. She understood what he was doing, and something in her chest shifted. In the wild, protection like this meant something. It meant he saw her as more than just another lioness. It meant he saw her as a partner, someone worthy of his time and his strength. The seasons continued to turn. The cubs grew stronger and bolder. By the time they reached 8 months old, they were beginning to join the pride on actual hunts, though they were still too small and inexperienced to be much help. Amara watched them learn, watched them make mistakes, watched them slowly develop the skills they would need to survive on their own. This was her job as a mother, to teach them everything she knew and hope it would be enough. But teaching them also meant keeping them safe from lessons that might kill them before they learned the right way to handle them. One morning when the pride was hunting near a riverbank, one of Amara's sons got too curious about a crocodile basking in the shallow water. The massive reptile's eyes opened, and its tail began to move. The cub, fortunately, didn't understand how fast a crocodile could strike. Amara was moving before conscious thought even engaged. She grabbed her son by the scruff of his neck and yanked him backward with a force that would have lifted him completely off the ground if he'd been slightly smaller. The crocodile's jaws snapped closed exactly where the cub had been standing just a heartbeat before. Amara roared at the reptile with such fury and intensity that it actually retreated back into deeper water, deciding this meal wasn't worth the effort. She held her trembling cub close to her body, her heart racing, feeling in that moment just how fragile life really was, how quickly everything could end. It was around this time that Amara began to notice something different about herself. Her body was changing in subtle ways. She was more aggressive during hunting. Her patience seemed shorter. She was spending more time away from her cubs, restless in ways she couldn't quite explain. She was coming into heat, her body preparing itself for breeding season. It was a natural cycle, something that happened to every lioness eventually. But it also meant that things in the pride were about to shift in ways both wonderful and dangerous. Rafiki's attention intensified. He began to spend almost all his time near Amara, following her through the territory, marking spots where she rested, making his intentions absolutely clear to every other lion in the pride. This was a sign of his interest, his desire to mate with her, to father her next litter. It was also a warning to any other male who might be thinking about similar ideas. The other lionesses watched this development with interest. Some were pleased, seeing it as a sign that the pride was strong and leadership was secure. Others were envious, wishing for the kind of attention Rafiki was showering on Amara, but none of them dared to challenge it. Rafiki was the strongest male in the pride, and his decisions were law. One evening, as the sun began to set and cast long shadows across the grasslands, Rafiki approached Amara while she was resting near her cubs. He didn't do anything aggressive or forward. He simply lay down beside her, close enough that their bodies were touching, close enough that she could feel his warmth. His message was simple and clear. You are mine. I am choosing you. Amara felt something unfamiliar in her chest. It wasn't fear or aggression. It was something softer, something that felt like acceptance. In the wild, this kind of bond between a male and female could mean safety for her cubs. It could mean protection, resources, strength. It could mean that the next chapter of her life might be easier than the first. And after everything she'd been through, after fighting 10 hyenas and nearly dying, she found herself ready for something different. What she didn't know was that the decision Rafiki was making would ripple through the pride in ways that would change everything. Other males were watching his choice. Other males were taking note of how he treated this scarred lioness with such obvious preference and respect. And in the hierarchy of lion society, that kind of public declaration meant something powerful. It meant Rafiki was willing to defend this choice with his life if necessary. Within a few weeks, Amara became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy felt different because she wasn't alone in protecting herself and her growing cubs. Rafiki brought her extra meat from kills. He kept watch while she rested. He positioned himself between her and any potential threat, making it clear to everyone that he had a stake in the success of this pregnancy. It was the safest she had felt in longer than she could remember. As her belly grew rounder and her movements slower, Amara spent more time teaching her older cubs about survival. She knew that soon she would need to step back from hunting and protecting them, while she gave birth to and cared for a new litter. She needed to make sure they were as independent as possible before that happened. She took her daughter on a hunting trip and let her make the kill on a young impala. It was clumsy and inefficient, but it was a real kill. The pride female's eyes burned with pride and accomplishment. Amara nuzzled her afterward, a gesture that meant everything. "I'm proud of you, you're going to be okay." With her sons, she practiced the territorial roaring that they would eventually need to master. She showed them how to read the wind, how to move silently through tall grass, how to approach prey without being noticed. She let them make mistakes in low-stakes situations so they wouldn't make those same mistakes when their lives actually depended on getting it right. Every moment of instruction was tinged with urgency because Amara knew something that younger animals didn't fully understand. Time wasn't guaranteed. Her brothers and sisters had taught her that lesson, and now she was teaching it to her cubs. Everything you learn today might be the thing that saves your life tomorrow. The day she went into labor came suddenly, the way these things do in nature. There's no warning, no countdown calendar. One moment you're resting in the shade, and the next moment your body is telling you that it's time. Rafiki stayed with her this time, something many male lions wouldn't do. He remained outside the den where she had chosen to give birth, standing guard, warning away anyone who might approach. He brought her meat, though she barely ate. He stayed awake through the night while she labored, bringing new life into the world. By morning, Amara had delivered 3 new cubs, 2 females and 1 male. They were smaller than her first litter had been, but they were healthy and strong. She licked them clean and helped them find her milk. Their tiny cries filled the den, sounds of life and need and hope all rolled into one. She had done it. She had survived her injuries, found a mate who valued her, and brought new life into the world. Rafiki's reaction when he first saw the new cubs was immediate. He approached slowly, respectfully, and sniffed each one carefully. Then he did something that would have shocked most lions. He lay down beside Amara and gently groomed her face, a gesture of tenderness and bond that was rare in the wild. He was communicating something without words. "These are our cubs. I will protect them. I will protect you. You are safe now." But safety in the African wilderness is always temporary, always fragile. The dry season would come again, new threats would emerge, other males would challenge Rafiki's rule, and the world would continue to be a place where strength and cleverness and luck were constantly required just to make it through another day. But for now, in this moment, Amara had something precious. She had family, she had protection, she had a mate who respected her enough to stand beside her and claim her cubs as his own. The new cubs grew quickly, the way young animals do when they have everything they need. Amara's older cubs, now nearly a year old, became unexpected helpers in ways that surprised everyone. The female took it upon herself to keep watch over the smaller cubs while Amara hunted. The 2 males would bring small kills back to the den, barely enough to feed themselves, but the effort was there. They understood, through some instinctive knowledge, that these were their siblings and protecting them mattered. Rafiki's presence in their lives became something permanent and powerful. He was the kind of father that most cubs never got to experience. He was patient when they climbed on him and pulled his mane. He was gentle when they tried to wrestle with him, even though he could crush them with a single swipe. He was protective without being overbearing, allowing them to take risks and learn lessons while still keeping them from crossing lines that would get them killed. The pride itself began to transform under this kind of stable leadership. When a pride has a strong male and a strong female working together, when they have clear vision and commitment, everything else tends to fall into place. Hunting became more coordinated. Territory boundaries became more firmly established. Younger lions had clear examples of what mattered and what didn't. Amara's scars, the ones from her fight with the 10 hyenas, began to fade slightly as her body healed from the stress of pregnancy and birth. But they never completely disappeared. The white line running down her side remained visible. Her torn ear remained bent. These marks became something that the cubs saw as normal, as part of who their mother was. They didn't understand that not all lionesses carried such obvious signs of battle. To them, their mother was simply their mother, and the scars were just part of her. But the younger cubs did seem to understand, even at their young age, that their mother was special. They would watch how other lions treated her, how they seemed to give her extra space and respect. They watched how Rafiki deferred to her opinion during pride decisions, something most males would never do. They were learning, without being taught, that strength and courage commanded respect regardless of size or position. One afternoon, when the new cubs were about 3 months old, something happened that would test everything Amara had learned about survival and protection. A neighboring pride had been weakened by disease and starvation. Their numbers had dropped, and their territory had become vulnerable. A coalition of young males from a completely different area had noticed this weakness and decided to take advantage of it. The attack came without warning. The young male coalition, a group of 4 males in their prime, crossed into Amara's pride's territory with clear intentions. They weren't there to hunt. They were there to establish dominance and claim new land. This kind of territorial takeover could mean death for the established males and forced breeding for the females. It was one of the most serious threats a pride could face. Rafiki detected their scent before anyone else. His entire body went rigid, and he released a roar that echoed across the savanna for miles. Every lion in the pride knew what that sound meant. Danger. Serious danger. He immediately began moving toward the intruders, but not to fight them directly. He was gathering the pride, making sure every female and cub was in a defensible position. Amara understood what was happening. She gathered her cubs and the other younger animals, moving them toward a rocky outcrop that would be easier to defend. The older females positioned themselves around the younger ones, creating a protective barrier. This was how pride survived territorial challenges. The males would handle the fighting while the females protected the young. The battle between Rafiki and the young male coalition lasted nearly 2 hours. It was brutal and violent and exhausting. Rafiki was older and more experienced, but he was facing 4 fresh, hungry males who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. The sounds of their fighting could be heard from where Amara and her cubs huddled with the rest of the pride. Roars that shook the ground, snarls that sounded like nothing else on earth, the noise of what could only be described as war. Amara felt her cubs pressed against her, trembling with fear. She wanted to run to help Rafiki, but she knew that would be abandoning her responsibility to protect the young. That was the impossible choice that every mother in the pride faced. Do you fight to defend your mate, or do you stay and protect your cubs? The answer was always the same, even though it broke your heart. The noise finally stopped. Silence fell across the savanna in a way that was somehow worse than the sounds of fighting had been. Everyone waited, holding their breath, not knowing what the silence meant. Then they heard it, a roar, Rafiki's roar, bloodied and exhausted, but alive. The young male coalition was retreating, limping away into the distance, understanding that they had picked a fight they couldn't win. Rafiki appeared a few minutes later, moving slowly, clearly in pain from multiple wounds. But he had won. He had held the territory. He had protected his pride. Amara and the other females came out of their protected positions and rushed to him, checking his wounds, grooming him, welcoming him back from battle. It was a moment of genuine relief and celebration, but the fight had taken its toll. Rafiki's wounds were serious. A deep gash ran along his shoulder, where one of the young males had gotten in a solid strike. His left eye was swollen nearly shut. One of his back legs was badly damaged, and he was limping severely. It would take weeks for him to fully recover, and those would be weeks when the pride's territory was vulnerable. During his recovery, Amara found herself stepping into a role she hadn't expected. She began to help coordinate the hunts. She would study prey patterns and position the hunters in the best spots. She would make judgments about which animals to pursue and which to leave alone. The other lionesses began to look to her for direction, respecting her experience and her obvious intelligence about how things should work. This wasn't rebellion against Rafiki. He was still the leader, the protector, the one they all ultimately answered to. But while his body healed, Amara became the operational mind of the pride. She was the one who made the day-to-day decisions that kept everyone alive and fed. Scientists studying the pride at this time would later note that they had never seen a female take on this kind of role before. Usually, pride structure was more rigid, with clear lines of authority that rarely shifted. But Amara seemed to have earned the respect of every lion in the pride through her actions and her obvious competence. She wasn't trying to be the leader. She was simply doing what needed to be done. Her cubs watched all of this from their position in the pride. They watched their mother coordinate hunts. They watched her make decisions. They watched how other lions deferred to her judgment. They were learning not just how to hunt or how to survive, but what it looked like to lead with intelligence and respect, rather than just raw power and aggression. By the time Rafiki had fully recovered, 6 weeks had passed. The pride had flourished under the partnership of his strength and Amara's intelligence. Prey had been plentiful, the territory had been secure, cubs had been safe and well fed. When he finally stood on his own 4 legs again, fully healed and ready to resume his full duties, something had shifted in the pride's dynamic. Rafiki didn't seem to resent Amara's increased role. Instead, he seemed to embrace it. He began to consult with her before making decisions. He would seek her out when the pride needed direction. He had learned, through watching her lead while he recovered, that strength alone wasn't enough. Intelligence and strategy mattered just as much. This kind of partnership between a male and female was rare in the wild. Most prides had a hierarchy where the male led and the females followed. But Amara and Rafiki were creating something different. They were showing that the most successful pride might be one where leadership was shared, where both parties brought their particular gifts to the table. Word of their unusual arrangement began to spread through the Serengeti. Young lionesses started to look at their situation differently, wondering if they too could have more say in how their prides were run. Young males began to understand that a female who could help you survive and thrive was more valuable than one who simply obeyed without question. Amara's first litter was now nearly 2 years old, which meant they would soon need to leave the pride. In lion society, young males have to leave their birth pride to prevent inbreeding and to establish their own territories. Young females sometimes stay, but they often leave as well to seek better opportunities. Amara watched her older daughter begin to make excursions beyond the pride's territory, exploring, learning the landscape, preparing for independence. Her 2 older sons were showing the first signs of their manes coming in, dark fuzz beginning to cover their necks. They were becoming young males, and that meant they would soon be seen as threats by Rafiki and the other resident males. It was the natural order, but it didn't make it any easier. Amara knew that the bonds she had built with them would soon be tested by biology and territorial law. The day her daughter left was bittersweet. The young female approached her mother and touched noses one last time, a gesture that seemed to carry all the weight of their years together. Then she turned and walked away toward a territory she had scouted, ready to establish herself as an independent lioness. Amara watched her go, feeling proud and heartbroken in equal measure. The day her sons fought Rafiki came shortly after. They didn't do it out of malice or disrespect. They did it because biology demanded it. They were developing their manes and their strength, and they needed to test themselves against the pride male to see if they could win. Rafiki fought them, as he was supposed to, but he didn't try to kill them. Instead, he drove them away, making it clear that they needed to find their own territory. The twins left together, as they had lived together. Amara's oldest cubs were gone, out into the world to forge their own paths, to find their own pride or establish their own territory. She had done her job as a mother. She had taught them everything they needed to know. Now it was up to them to survive. But she still had her younger cubs, the offspring of her union with Rafiki. These cubs were still dependent on her, still learning, still building their foundation for life. As she watched her older offspring disappear into the golden grass one final time, she redirected her focus to the younger generation. Her second daughter was showing remarkable hunting instincts, even more refined than her older sister. There was something about the way she observed prey, the way she could predict movement and position herself perfectly. By the time she was a year old, she was making independent kills on small prey. By 18 months, she was bringing down medium-sized antelope. Her younger sons were more playful, more interested in wrestling and roughhousing than in the serious business of learning to hunt. But underneath that playfulness was growing strength and growing skill. They would wrestle with each other, with their older siblings before those siblings left, with Rafiki when he felt patient enough to indulge them. Each wrestling match was actually a lesson in technique and timing. Rafiki had become a different kind of father to these younger cubs than he might have been without Amara's influence. He was patient. He was teaching rather than simply dominating. He was showing them how to be strong without being cruel, how to be powerful without being needlessly aggressive. He was teaching them, in essence, to be like Amara, to lead with intelligence and respect as well as with strength. The years passed in the way they always do in the African wilderness. Seasons came and went. Dry times and wet times cycled through their endless pattern. Amara's younger cubs grew to maturity, eventually establishing themselves in the pride or leaving to forge their own paths. The pride itself continued to thrive under the leadership of Rafiki and Amara, becoming one of the most stable and successful prides in the region. Researchers who studied the Serengeti during this period began to document something unprecedented, a pride led by a partnership between equals. Amara had never challenged Rafiki's ultimate authority, and Rafiki had never tried to diminish Amara's role in decision-making. They had created something rare and beautiful, a working relationship that benefited every member of the pride. Young lions from other territories began to gravitate toward their pride, seeking to join a group that had clear structure and abundant resources. The pride grew from what it had been when Amara first faced those 10 hyenas, expanding to include more females, more cubs, more strength. With more members came more security, more hunting power, more resilience against the constant threats of the wild. Amara's role in the pride evolved in ways that even surprised her. She became something like an advisor to Rafiki, someone whose counsel he actively sought on important matters. When a younger female was struggling to raise her cubs, Amara would take her under her paw, teaching her the techniques that had worked for her. When territorial disputes arose with neighboring prides, it was often Amara's strategic thinking that determined the outcome. But she never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the days when she had been alone with 3 tiny cubs, fighting for every meal, protecting them from every threat. She never forgot what it felt like to face 10 hyenas and know that if she failed, her children would die. That memory stayed with her, shaping how she lived every day of her life. By the time Amara was in her 6th year of life, she was considered elderly for a lioness in the wild. Most wild lions don't make it to this age. Disease, injury, starvation, predators, and the simple wear and tear of survival typically claim them earlier. But Amara had been blessed with something that went beyond just luck. She had been blessed with intelligence, resilience, and a will to live that seemed almost unbreakable. Her body showed the signs of her years. Her movements weren't quite as quick as they used to be. Hunting became something she participated in less frequently, though her strategic input remained valuable. The scars from her fight with the hyenas had faded to pale lines that were barely visible anymore. But her face had changed, the youthful softness replaced by something harder, more angular, more wise. The cubs born during her later years grew up in a very different pride than the one she had first given birth to. They were born into stability. They were born into a pride where the leader valued intelligence as much as strength. They were born into a system where females had voices and influence, and they were born with the knowledge, passed down through stories and observation, of what their pride's mother had done, of how she had faced 10 hyenas alone and won, of how she had risen from nothing to become one of the most respected lions in the Serengeti. One afternoon when Amara was resting in her favorite spot beneath a large acacia tree, her original daughter returned. The young female, now fully grown and bearing the unmistakable marks of a successful hunter, approached her mother carefully. She had established her own territory about 15 kilometers away. She had cubs of her own now, 3 strong youngsters who showed promise of becoming great hunters themselves. She had come back to visit, a rare occurrence in the wild where adult lions typically avoid their birth prides after leaving. But this female had never forgotten the lessons her mother had taught her. She had never forgotten watching Amara coordinate hunts and make decisions. She had never forgotten the strength and grace her mother carried even when facing impossible odds. The 2 lionesses touched noses in greeting, a gesture that seemed to carry years of separation and understanding. Amara's daughter presented her cubs, and Amara's heart swelled with a joy that transcended species and time. She was a grandmother now. Her bloodline was continuing, and it was carrying forward not just her genetics, but the values and the strength that she had fought so hard to instill. She spent hours with her daughter and grandcubs, showing them the same patience and instruction she had shown to her own offspring. She demonstrated hunting techniques. She showed them how to read the wind. She taught them about danger and how to survive it. She was passing on knowledge that had cost her blood and tears to acquire. When her daughter left to return to her own territory, Amara watched her go with the understanding that comes only with age and experience. She had done her job. She had created something that would outlive her. She had given her cubs not just life but the tools to live that life well. Rafiki had grown older alongside her, his massive body still impressive but clearly feeling the weight of the years. His mane, once pitch black, had faded to a dusty brown and grey. He moved more slowly, spent more time resting in the shade, but his mind remained sharp, and his authority in the pride remained absolute. He had been a good mate to Amara, a worthy father to her cubs, and a partner in building something that would endure. One evening as they rested together beneath the stars, Rafiki made a decision. He stepped down from his role as the pride's primary territorial defender. It wasn't because he was afraid, and it wasn't because he had lost his will to fight. It was because he understood something that many males never grasp. Sometimes leadership means knowing when to give way to the next generation. A younger, stronger male from within the pride moved into the primary role, taking over the duties of defending territory and making territorial decisions. But Rafiki remained the pride's patriarch, respected and consulted, still the final authority on matters of true importance. And Amara remained at his side, the heart of the pride, the one whose wisdom guided decisions both large and small. The younger male respected both of them. He had grown up watching how Rafiki and Amara led together, and he understood that this was the model to follow. When he eventually brought a strong female into his sphere of attention, he treated her with respect and valued her input. The legacy that Amara and Rafiki had created was being passed forward to the next generation. Researchers continued to study the pride, noting the unusual stability and the remarkable lack of internal conflict. They documented how the females seemed to have genuine agency in pride decisions. They recorded the way older lions mentored younger ones. They noted the survival rates of cubs, which were significantly higher than in other prides. Everything about this pride seemed to suggest that cooperation and intelligence produced better outcomes than pure aggression and dominance. In the academic world, papers began to be written about the pride. Scientists debated whether Amara was truly capable of the kind of strategic thinking that observation suggested, or whether they were simply projecting human qualities onto animal behavior. But the evidence was undeniable. This pride was thriving in ways that most prides didn't. Amara's body eventually began to fail in ways that could not be overcome. She didn't get sick exactly, but rather seemed to simply be running out of energy. The constant demands of survival finally became too much. She spent more and more time resting, eating less, moving only when necessary. Rafiki never left her side. He brought her kills from his hunts, though she ate less and less. He groomed her face with infinite gentleness. He lay pressed against her body during the cool nights, providing warmth and comfort. He was showing the pride what it meant to honor a bond that had lasted years and had created something beautiful. The end came quietly. On a morning when the sun was just beginning to rise over the Serengeti, Amara's breathing simply grew slower and slower until it stopped. Rafiki didn't move away from her body for nearly an hour, as if his presence might somehow keep her from truly being gone. The pride mourned her in the way animals mourn, through changed behavior and unusual vocalizations. Lions don't have the same kind of funeral rites that humans do, but they understand loss. They understand when someone important has been taken from them. Every lioness in the pride seemed to feel the absence of the one who had guided them, who had taught them, who had shown them that intelligence and strength could walk together. But Amara didn't truly die that day. She lives on in the behavior of her offspring and her offspring's offspring. She lives on in how the pride structures itself, valuing both strength and intelligence. She lives on in every young female who watches the pride leaders and understands that she too can have a voice in how things are done. Scientists who later compiled the entire documentation of this pride would conclude that Amara represented something remarkable in the animal kingdom. She wasn't the strongest lion who ever lived. She wasn't the fastest hunter or the most aggressive fighter, but she was something perhaps more valuable. She was wise. She was adaptable. She understood that survival wasn't just about individual strength, but about community and cooperation. The story of how a lioness faced 10 hyenas alone and one became legend in the Serengeti. Young lions were told about her. Other prides heard about the scarred female who had built something extraordinary. And for those who understood animal behavior deeply, she became a symbol of something profound, that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from physical dominance, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything for those you love. Years after Amara's death, researchers still use footage and data from her pride to teach students about lion behavior and social dynamics. Her story has been featured in documentaries about African wildlife. Her impact on the pride extended so far beyond her own lifetime that scientists still refer to it as Amara's pride, even decades later, in recognition of her outsized influence on how it developed and functioned. The hyenas that she faced that day probably never knew what they had started. They never understood that the scarred female who refused to break, who stood her ground against all odds, would go on to change the entire trajectory of her pride and influence how lions across the region understood what was possible. And that's perhaps the most beautiful part of Amara's story. She didn't become a legend because she was born into power or because she inherited a position of authority. She became a legend because when the moment demanded it, she did something extraordinary. She stood alone between danger and the ones she loved, and she refused to fall. Every mother in the animal kingdom faces that same choice, in smaller ways, every single day. The choice between safety and protection, the choice between running and standing firm, the choice between surrendering and fighting. Most make that choice in relative obscurity, with no one watching, no cameras recording, no scientist documenting their bravery. But their choice matters just as much. Every time a mother protects her young against a threat, every time she goes without food so her cubs can eat, every time she stays alert through a dangerous night so her babies can sleep safely, that is the real story of survival in the wild. That is the actual foundation upon which everything in nature is built. Amara's story is just one example of something that happens countless times every single day across the African continent and around the world. It's a reminder that strength isn't always visible, courage isn't always loud, and the most important victories are often the quiet ones, won in the darkness by individuals whose names will never be known by the wider world. But in the Serengeti, where the wind carries stories across the plains, where the animals communicate through roars and scent and behavior, the story of Amara and the 10 hyenas will live forever. It will be told to cubs who haven't even been born yet. It will inspire females facing their own impossible odds. It will serve as proof that sometimes the most ordinary among us can do the most extraordinary things when it matters most. If this story of sacrifice, bravery and love has touched your heart, please hit that like button right now. It helps us bring you more of these incredible true stories from the African wild. Subscribe to our channel because we have so many more amazing tales to share with you. We bring you real stories about real animals, about the bonds that connect us, about the strength that lives inside all creatures who face the challenges of survival. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think gave Amara the strength to face 10 hyenas alone. Was it just instinct, or was it something deeper? Was it the love she felt for her cubs, or was it something about her own character that had been forged through years of struggle? We love hearing your thoughts and perspectives on these incredible animals and their stories. The African wilderness is full of stories like Amara's, stories of courage and determination and love played out against the backdrop of one of Earth's most beautiful and brutal landscapes. Every day, animals make choices that would astound us if we could witness them. Every night, mothers stand guard over their young, ready to face any threat that comes their way. Amara's story is real, documented, observed, and verified. It's not a fairy tale or a fabrication designed to sell a story. It's the truth about what happens in nature when survival and love collide. It's a reminder that the world is far more complex and beautiful and meaningful than we often give it credit for. The next time you see a scar on an animal, remember Amara. Remember that every mark tells a story of something faced and overcome. Remember that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is the simple decision to not give up, to stand firm, to protect what matters most. That's what Amara did on the day she faced 10 hyenas, and that's what made her a legend that will echo through the Serengeti for generations to come.